Okay, so welcome everybody. I think we'll get going. So it's great to see you all here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tom Griffin. I'm an assistant professor at the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management. I'm also the assistant director of the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research at Ryerson University. We're going to start with our land acknowledgement for today, which is the land that Ryerson University itself is situated on. So Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So thank you for joining us. Just very briefly, we are part of the Main Street Reimagined project. Is a project that's housed within the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research. I'm going to, in a minute, I will drop the website for our institute into the chat. But basically, we're an institute that seeks to do research of academic quality that has application for the industry and also to give our students some experience and some connection to the industries that we work with. So we're always keen to find partners for ideas and projects and utility for the work that we're doing. So please follow us on social media, connect with us, and so on. Today we have Walter is going to talk about two different topics. And so the structure that we're going to have is that Walter will talk for around 15 minutes, and then we'll take 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A about that topic. And the first topic is going to be storytelling. And then the second topic will start around halfway through the session. And again, Walter will speak for around 15 minutes, and we'll have another following conversation about that. And that conversation will be around after 6, so the nighttime economy and main streets after 6 p.m. Just to plant a seed in your minds, I'll share the link in the chat sooner. Oh, my audio is a bit soft. I'll sit a bit closer. There we go. Apologies. Is that we do have some more sessions coming along, so I'll send a link in the chat about that as well. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Walter. If you guys do have any questions, please type them into the chat. You can also raise your hand, so you can go to the reactions button and raise your hand, and we'll ask you to come off mute and you can ask your question. So thank you very much. Walter, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome to everyone. As we discussed in our last webinar, what we're doing over the next several weeks is a product of the research and consultations that we did with various main streets across the country and our literature search and our other research activities. And we made a decision rather than waiting to put the handbook together all at one time, that we would release it as we're developing it. And we felt this was necessary given the nature of the challenges that main streets are facing, but at the same time looking at opportunities for co-creation. And we'll be indicating throughout our sessions that we'd really enjoy you letting us know how we're doing, to provide us with case studies, with feedback, which we'll incorporate into the final version of the handbook, which will be available sometime mid-2022. One of the challenges that we have in tourism in general, but now even more so with Main Street, is how do we tell our story? And we've been trying to do this in various ways of developing a higher level of awareness about what Main Street has to offer from a visitor economy point of view. So it's fair to say every Main Street has a story, has a history that it may or may not choose to share. And it's really about discovering what makes a place special. How do the stakeholders on Main Street begin to make sure that their particular perspectives and values and history are to the visitor? And quite clearly, every Main Street sits within a community. So it's inevitable that there's a strong connection between the Main Street and the community in terms of the story that it wants to tell, not just from a history point of view, but of a current story. And we recognize that not every Main Street will choose to tell their story or will have the time or the expertise to do it. We would argue that Main Streets that take the time to tell their story will have a position of advantage, especially as it relates to attracting visitors from outside the community. We could spend our whole time together talking much more detail about what storytelling is, but it's really an attempt to explain the significance, the history, the culture, the nature of a particular site or area. And it's really important element is to connect the audience with the subject matter or objects that are being looked at. And so our attempt here is to say, how do we tell our story? How do we do that effectively? And how do we use it to help us in attracting more visitors to our main streets? So I think obviously it's who's your audience going to be? Who's your present audience? Who do you want to attract? And Tom talked about this in our last webinar. We'll be talking about it more. But what kind of people do you think will be interested in your main street? Who do you think will have the kind of impact that you're looking for? And how do you realize your overall goals as a main street using the visitor economy? So people might be going to your main street for entertainment. They might be going for shopping. They might be going for education. They might be going for a great meal. Or maybe they just want to escape from their everyday life and go into an area that's different, that's providing different opportunities. And so, as with any aspect of Main Street development as it relates to the visitor economy, there's a process that we could follow, and we describe this within the note that we sent you on storytelling. And so I won't spend time doing that this morning or this afternoon. But one of the things that we think is really important is why are you doing it? What are you hoping to get out of your storytelling exercise? Is it strictly to put yourself on the map? Is it really to appeal to particular visitor segments? Is it to help particular parts of the Main Street that are suffering and could benefit from increased visitors and the spending that they bring with them? And it's also then, what are the outcomes that we're looking for? What do you hope to do and achieve out of the exercise of telling your story? One of the central parts that we describe in more detail in our publication is, what is the theme? What's the major idea that you're going to be looking for? So as I indicate here on the other side of the screen, is it just to tell the larger story? Or is it to focus on a particular part of the main street that you think visitors would be interested in? Here we look at an example of entrepreneurship. Or is it that you see the Main Street as a gateway, as an entry into the larger community from a visitor perspective? Or is it children that you want to appeal to? So I think it's important then, as we begin to think about storytelling, what are those particular objectives? What are some things that we think are particularly important? Is there anything significant about your Main Street that you think needs to be communicated? Is it the feeling of community? Is it the fact that the Main Street has played an important role within the overall community and region? Identifying that significance, we feel, is obviously important. Storytelling isn't describing facts. It's really developing ideas that will be of interest to people. and to their everyday lives. We're always faced with the challenge of level of detail, and we would suggest that it shouldn't be too specialized, that people aren't necessarily going to your main street for an educational process, but because they're trying to discover new dimensions that will be of interest in their everyday lives. Within the publication, we describe a range of things that can be done, all of them well within the reach and capacities, we would argue, of most main streets. And so I won't take time to do that, but if you have any questions about any of these, please feel free to ask about them today or to send us your questions. We think it's really important that the storytelling aspect be part of your overall strategy, that it's not only just for the visitor, but it's for the community itself, the Main Street community, to feel strongly about the story that they want to tell through various ways. And one of the things that we constantly talk about in tourism is about, we're in the memory business. We try to create memories that will be meaningful to the visitor and will provide them with a reason to return to our main streets. And next, in the next round of webinars, we'll be talking about partnerships, but certainly storytelling development and delivery lends itself very well to partnering with a range of different stakeholders. The manual that we present in our publication is really an attempt to introduce you to the whole area of storytelling, but obviously it's much more detailed than we could begin to provide in our presentation today and in the publication. So what are some important things? Keep it simple. Again, remembering that visitors are going to your main street for a particular reason, or your story has to appeal to them through social media and through other means. So make it simple. Make it visual. Make it so that they can immediately see the nature of the story that you want to tell. And to certainly use social media in a savvy way. One of the interesting strategies is to tell your story possibly through one or more businesses in your community. These are human stories. The business that was started 50 or 60 years ago that's been in the same family and what's happened to that family is the kind of thing that people will be looking for and why they want to support your main street. So we feel very strongly that it's got to be simple and straightforward. Now, how do we do this? And one of the challenges that we had in developing the handbook through the pandemic is the difficulty of actually getting out and experiencing some of these areas. And now that things have opened up, we'll be developing case studies, and Sylvain and others are proposing these to us. But just to give you an example, I was in Collingwood last weekend on the main street, and this was a very simple process of storytelling, but it gave me a sense of the region where it came from, why it was important, and I got a whole new understanding of why the main street looked like it was, where it came from, and the kinds of things that could be interesting. So in some ways, it can be fairly straightforward that your research and stakeholder engagement around storytelling can lead to fairly easy responses, and signage and panels are one way that we described in our handbook. Some of them are much more ambitious, and I'm not sure if anyone has been to Chemainus, but they've chosen to tell their story in a very different way by using murals, which many communities are now doing. And it's probably one of the best examples that I've seen where they have chosen to use murals in various ways to tell about the origin of their community and what went on and why it looks the way it does. And this is well within the reach, we would argue, of most main streets. that there are creative people within your community, or you might bring people in, and once they know more about who you are, they can help to do this. It also has the advantage of covering up at times what are unsightly buildings, providing visual interest in the community. And I've seen it in a range of communities where this is working very effectively. Chemainus obviously is a very ambitious set of undertakings, but every community can do that. One project, and this came from that I'd seen, but my friend Martin pointed this out, was something called pop silos. This is a completely different approach where the area around main streets are telling their stories in a particular way. But one effective role of a main street is to act as the center, as the place where you can begin to understand a region, number one, and secondly, how to go about understanding it. And this is in Ontario, in the eastern part of Ontario. I won't go through the whole story, but I've given you the URL here. And what they've done is chosen to tell the stories by painting on silos. Now, this really has a really interesting set of advantages, that because they're scattered around the region, it gets people out of their comfort zone, and you actually go and hear the stories that are being done. It's community-based, and every year they add a couple more silos. And it helps to illustrate that there are a number of different ways that we can actually communicate with the audiences that we're looking for. But this is one that I found to be particularly exciting, especially if it could be focused and introduced through the main street, so that you have to go to the main street to find out about it, and then to encourage people to go back to the main street to eat in restaurants and do some shopping. We'll be giving you more examples, but these were just some examples that we wanted to introduce to give you a sense of what can happen. We really want you to share examples with us, and we'll of course credit you when you do this, but this is part of the community that we're trying to develop, that will want to tell us their stories and how they go about doing it, and interesting examples. But today, if you've got questions, obviously we welcome these, but if anyone has examples of storytelling on Main Street from a visitor perspective, you might share it with us today or on the chat or at a later date. So all I've tried to do is to give you a sense of storytelling on Main Street, and for more detail, obviously, we refer you back to the section that is on our website.
Thanks, Walter. If anyone does have any questions or comments or examples to share, we do have a little bit of time right now, so please feel free to come off mute or type into the chat. I think something else about the storytelling, which I think to some extent, I'm sure many of you appreciate this already, but is the value and the opportunity of storytelling, not just to attract visitors, but that then feeds into the sense of resident culture and value. What is our story, and it's always fascinating to see other people be interested in the stories that your community has to share, and that kind of can increase sense of pride and understanding of what it is that your downtown or your community has to offer. Sidewalk crossings are often used. Kay's mentioned. Judy talks about personally loving the Fisherman's Memorial in a park near Bronte Village. I think is there someone from Bronte Village on the call? I think there was somebody registered about from Bronte Village. Has anyone seen examples of storytelling kind of change the resident perspective of their own community and seeing visitors being attracted to those stories? Walter, is that something that you've picked up on in your work in tourism?
I mean, the whole process of developing a story is in itself a building process of building commitment that very often the Main Street retailers may not be aware of what makes their Main Street special. That may be very focused on their particular retail operation. It's also useful for the community itself to begin to feel an increased pride that they have within their community in Main Street that has significance. I mean, one of the things that we've found in the work that we've done is that for many communities, especially those that are suffering economically or that have problems of building confidence in the community, that the mere fact that people are choosing to come to their community provides them with a sense of pride that they have something that visitors are traveling to experience. And so that in itself is important, that it has that impact of building a profile that's important. It also has an economic development purpose to it. That very often, if I'm looking to locate my retail operation of some description, I might be looking for a community that fits my values. And Tom, you talked about that at the beginning. But who are we as a community, and how do we manifest this on our Main Street, that we share a set of values, a set of objectives that can be best accomplished on the Main Street? And I want to be part of that. I want to invest in the community because it's the kind of place that I feel I can prosper and be comfortable with what the community is. And so that process of engagement, of getting people to think about what makes their community special, is an important one.
That's great. Thanks, Walt. There's been a couple of good examples come up in the chat. David, I hate to put you on the spot, but it'd be really interesting to hear about the downloadable self-guided tours and how that's picked up and the impact that might have had, whether even anecdotally.
Sure. Yeah. There hasn't been quite as much uptake as I think I don't know that we expected or hoped for anything. It was we just knew that we needed to do some sort of adaptation. They've been well received when people have learned about them, and it was, the balance there was that so much of the way that our walking tours are done really is dependent on, it's a true storytelling experience. So each tour guide kind of puts their own spin on the tour, whatever their particular interests happen to be. They're also reading the crowd, right? So you've got 10 people or 20 people, and you're figuring out which jokes are landing and where people are sort of leaning in for more interesting stories and things. So doing that as an audio tour without taking away from the in-person side they did a really good job of just kind of distilling sort of the main points. They're almost like samplers. So right. Someone could do these on their own and then still be interested in coming to do one with people.
That's great. Yeah, really interesting. And I think, the different ways of getting those stories to people. I remember when I first moved to Toronto, there was the Murmur program. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it was a green ear sign that was dotted around the city, and you could just call the number that was on the sign, and it would give you a story from somebody that had grown up on that street corner, for example, and then you could listen to them talking about, this used to be a butcher's shop, and I used to live around the corner, and just hear that real personal story about that place. Really gave me that connection to the city that I'd moved to, and I think that's the same potentially for visitors to the main streets as well. It's great. Thank you, David.
Well, Downtown Yonge in Toronto does the cool thing with the music history and all the different shops.
Absolutely, yeah, which is some great stories to tell. And I guess that's the other, stories, not all stories will appeal to all people, and finding those niche stories that attract different segments and meet different people's interests is a really good strategy as well.
Absolutely.
It's great. Thank you. So in the interest of time, Walter, we'll move on to the next one. And I guess just while you're setting up, Walter, is the intention of this project, of course, is, we've gone out to many BIAs to collect information, and we're kind of sharing that information back with you guys through our tourism lens. So, like we are keen to learn more and to share more and kind of make this project a bit of a space where those discussions can happen. So, all of these best practices being shared are very useful to us. So thank you. So Walter, we're going to move topics now, moving to the after 6 nighttime economy. And again, the downloads for these presentations are all available on the website. I'll share it again in a couple of minutes in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. When we were developing ideas, we tried to come up with some that might be a little bit different than what would typically be considered. And one of the ones that attracted some interest when we were out telling our story about the handbook was this whole notion of after 6 on Main Street. For those of you who run Main Streets or are involved in Main Streets, you're aware that one of the ongoing issues always is opening hours. And so very often in the summer, I've spent time going around Toronto and in the northern region, looking at, and quite often things close at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock and they're not open on Sundays. And we're well aware of the reasons for this. Many of them are family businesses. Many of them have limited human resources. The cost of opening longer are at times prohibitive. And so there are a wide range of reasons why these opening hours are part of the Main Street landscape. Sometimes they're even more restricted. And I was in a couple of places, which I won't mention, where these were wonderful, beautiful main streets with great retail activity right in the middle of a tourism area. And they closed at 5 and 6 o'clock. And I kept thinking about the fact that these people were looking for something the tourists were looking for something to do. Now, our work in this has gone back some time when we were part of a project looking at how the nighttime economy in Toronto might grow. And it's true to say that all over the world, politicians and planners and economic development people are recognizing the importance of what happens after 6 or 9 or whatever it happens to be. Much of that is not of direct relevance to Main Street in terms of that experience. But one of the things that we're trying to do is to see how we can use that particular idea as it relates to Main Street. And so I think it's fair to say that many of our places are designed for daytime activity, that we don't often think about the fact of what happens after 6 or what could happen after 6. One of the concerns that we have is, I'm just going to back up here, is that Main Streets represent a significant infrastructure. We build parking, we might extend our sidewalks, improve our stores, maybe look at the entry to the community. And yet at 6 o'clock, we stop using it. And so from a use of infrastructures to think, can we make better use of the existing infrastructure? The fact we have parking, the fact that we've beautified the Main Street, that we've extended the sidewalks, that we may even have put into place a stage. And so one of the things to think about is, can after 6 help us to make better use of our infrastructure? Quite clearly, in certain Main Street areas, we do have visitors at particular times of the year that are looking for something to do, not only for their children, for themselves. And so it seems that at periods of time, depending on where the Main Street's located, there were really good opportunities to extend the hours or change your hours to adapt at least to the visitor. One of the side benefits, and Tom talked about this in his webinar a couple of weeks ago, was that in fact it may even help people within the surrounding community to have something to do where they don't have to go somewhere else. Depending on the nature of the activity, it might create full-time jobs, maybe, but it can certainly create part-time opportunities. One of the projects that I have seen working well in Britain was, how do you animate empty stores? And many main streets are struggling with this. And very often, one way to animate and provide vitalization to an area might be to work with landlords to say, how can we fill your empty stores after 6, where craftspeople from the region might come and work, or artists, or even set up a coffee shop on a temporary basis. But it helps to animate, fill the spaces, and in some cases, hopefully create new businesses. And we do know that the visitor is looking for authentic experiences, and this is one thing we can do. So what kinds of things can we look at? Well, we can have theater. So theater might not always be on the main street, but it could be centered on the main street. Could be traveling companies. It could be local theater. But give visitors a reason to come to your community to experience a community theater. And there's good examples in many communities. Music is always an important aspect of maybe specializing and maybe supporting local people to have a venue where they can play their music and provide something unique. Celebrations are obviously important. And so it may not be that you're open after 6 every night, but if you're celebrating something in the community, is there a way to stay open till 9 to give the retailers an extra opportunity to make money, but also to give you a draw? Coffee shops are something that can set up on a rather informal basis. And one of the things that we find is that very often when we talk about after 6 and restaurants and bars, we think about alcohol, but many communities need and want safe places to go to. So non-alcohol places are important. Bars and restaurants, I think, are obvious. Night markets are one way of getting people out, that rather than running the market only during the day. But our feeling very often is that there are significant opportunities. Now, we talk about this in great more detail about how you can do it on your main street. But there are things that we've learned that we think are relevant to Main Street. Are there zoning laws? Are there land use regulations that might make this difficult? Can you identify particular places in your Main Street that might provide an opportunity for a pop-up to occur during the summer, whether it's selling crafts or an artist, or maybe a small food and beverage operation? Light up your Main Street, make it look special, make it look like we're really welcoming people to want to stay in our community. Can we look at giving tax breaks or grants to people who are proposing after 6 activities? Let's look at how we can better govern after 6. Is that a separate set of activities that are occurred and where energy and time goes into ensuring success? This may require capacity building. And I think it's important to think about that entire experience after 6. How well does it work? How easy is it to park? Does it feel safe? Does it appeal to a wide range of different users? So we would suggest that there are a range of things that can be done to begin to achieve that after 6 potential. We think that there is a process for helping to achieve success and after 6 in terms of getting stakeholder buy-in, having clear objectives. Are you looking now to better position your community for the visitor economy in general? Do you see it as a way of supporting local businesses? Do you see it as a way of setting up pop-ups? have you done your research? Do you have a plan? I mean, is there some plan that you can look at? And always, how do you assess how well you're doing? And so some key ideas pop out. One of the challenges is that most of our main streets are resource poor, and there's not money and time to necessarily invest in long-term initiatives that may not pay off. So when we say be tactical, maybe try a few things, try night markets, try music, try theater, to see if things actually work before actually investing significant amount of energy and time. Get advice. I mean, there are a lot of people who are really interested in the arts and community life who would be more than happy to share their experience. Obviously, security is important. At night, the walk from the parking lot might be something you think about. Work with your local businesses. Does the theater or music group work with the restaurants and offer a special during that particular period of time? As you begin to develop your after six economy, do you need to change things physically? Do you need to have a stage area that can be used both during the day and at night to facilitate that has power and lighting? And so we think that there are some easily implemented ideas, and then obviously some longer term ones. So we would argue that for certain communities that have adopted the visitor economy, that an after six strategy is something that they might want to incorporate into their overall planning, realizing this may take place over a number of years. And to make the case, if the evidence is there, that this is something that could provide your community, Main Street, with a position of advantage, where people from around, whether they're visitors to the region or people within the region, but they want to come because you've got a set of activities at particular times of the year that allow the Main Street to live after six. And really important then is to see how all of the stakeholders can see that they have an interest in ensuring that this would occur. We're really interested in developing this further. So if anyone has examples or ideas extending that after six period, always realizing that it may be that these activities might occur within public spaces, might occur within vacant spaces, or as we've seen some examples that a good one that I've seen recently is that the local beauty shop closed at 6, and then a group of people came in and ran a cafe with live music and just moved the furniture around with minimal or no capital investment, but extended the life of the community. Hopefully these have been useful ideas, and we welcome your questions and suggestions.
Thanks, Walter. Does anyone have any questions, responses, examples of relating to the after six economy? We do know that this is a challenge for many Main Street areas to get that momentum, that buy-in and that momentum going. Walter, perhaps have you seen any examples of people, like specific examples of areas, communities, whether in the tourism capacity or Main Street more generally, of doing great jobs with the after six, starting the after six economy?
Certainly within the more urban neighborhood Main Streets, this is certainly occurring, that there's a recognition that that this is important. The real challenge from my point of view is certainly within what I would view as neighborhood main streets, whether they're in bigger or smaller urban settlements, but really it's the more those in rural areas. And it's this idea of this extension, and I haven't seen those. I mean, again, I'll just relate to my most recent experience. I was in, well, I won't mention the community again because we try to be positive here, but that the restaurants were opened and doing a gangbuster business, lineups to get into the sidewalk and other cafes, but everything else was closed. And you could see people walking around, and I could almost view that these were visitors of one form or another who could really have, to make this a complete experience, would have had a chance to shop and to really experience what were really quite unique retail opportunities. And yet, because of the 5 or 6 o'clock closing, they couldn't. And we have to think about the fact that often visitors, especially in areas that are sports related, that people are out during the day. They're out hiking and boating or skiing, but at night they want something else to do but just walk around, or just to go to a restaurant, and something that appeals to children. So to me, it seems that if I am running a toy store right next to a restaurant that's open, I would want to be open because I could see the opportunities where after eating, the kids will have somewhere to go. So I'm not aware of any examples of that occurring, and that's why we're starting this off to see whether people are doing it and whether it's working and whether it has the opportunity. But to answer your question, Tom, when I was doing Main Streets in Alberta years ago, one of the things that we did is that the theater was running quite successful performances, would bring in local music artists, but nothing else was open. And the minute that we started, so we went and worked carefully with the restaurant people and said, can you extend your hours till 9? And we recognize that this makes it difficult for you because you need extra staff, but can you open later, or what might happen? Depending on what was going on, there could have been a retailer or two that really could benefit from the opportunity of new people coming into the community, of seeing what they had. And so what we saw is that we needed to work very closely in making the case. That was the one thing. And then what could we do to maximize the opportunity? And that's where the partnership came in. If you buy the theater ticket or the music ticket to the music venue, you got 20% off from the restaurant, or 10%, or the other way around, or it was a package deal. And one of the things that we found that worked well was that we had 2 or 3 motels within easy driving distance. And they then started to see this as part of the attraction, to say, oh, by the way, come down this weekend and come to the main street. And we've got a music festival, or the local community group is presenting a theater performance. Oh, and by the way, the restaurants are open.
Yeah.
And so it's a mindset. But the reason we were introducing this is that, at least in my limited experience here, I haven't seen evidence of this, of that kind of creativity to begin to think about what it could do.
No, good comments. There's a little bit of chat going on, and I'll read the questions out. But if Carly from Corfu Lakes, if you want to come off mute and ask the question yourself, please feel free. But Carly first asked, is there a ripple effect that once some initiatives start, more will pop up? I guess you're finding those first few people to do something and then find the momentum, go from there. Is that something that you have anything to say, Walter, or perhaps someone else on the call has some experience of that?
Tom, one of the things that I think all people working on Main Street run into is trying to do something new and different is difficult at times. And so the first thing to do is recognize that that's the case, that's not necessarily going to be embraced, completely embraced. But you were hinting at this in a comment you just made, that it might be do you try it tactically? Do you find that one store, one or two stores in a restaurant or two are willing to try this out and to evaluate it and to then be able to share that experience that that the restaurant suddenly saw that not only did their nighttime activity increase, but more people were coming in for lunch. Now that would be over a period of time. Or people who said, we'd never thought about coming to the main street after 6, but geez, it's really a nice place. And, we're blessed with so many wonderful main streets with great buildings. And just, people love lights, and lighting them up and telling the story at night might be just a very different way of doing it. There's a special magic that occurs when you're able to do that. And maybe that's part of your advertising is we're lighting up our main street and we're highlighting what makes us different. Oh, and by the way, when you're here, we've got a pop-up coffee shop. There's a musical group playing in a performance space on the main street. Those are the kinds of things that can work. Now, it may not work everywhere, but there are places with huge number of visitors that are staying in Airbnbs or have country homes and whatever, who would be natural for wanting to come out and spend some time in the community. But it also then begins to position, this is a special place. I want to go there because not only is it good during the day, but boy, we have something to do at night other than, going to the restaurants on the edge of town.
That's great. Carly, yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'm from Kawartha Lakes, so we've got a number of different downtowns in our community. And we've seen this in a number of different instances. So one would be, we use a community improvement plan just for building upgrades, and that can include different types of lighting. We found when we launched it, it was really slow in its uptake. But now that we see it happening, it's almost like a ripple effect. So we're noticing that one business will use our program and then 3 will do improvements. And so it's actually facilitating sort of makeover of the different downtowns, but we're not funding all of it. In some communities, we've seen that it's these entertainment type venues who utilize this program, and when one does it, then another one does it. But I'm also looking at this from a different perspective. In one community, we used to have quite a lively sort of nighttime downtown, and slowly over the last 15 years or so, a lot of those businesses have disappeared and nothing's come in to replace them. Or in some of our really heavily sort of tourism focused communities, we have a huge sort of nightlife in terms of patios and restaurants, and it's only 1, maybe 2 shops that will stay open, similar to what you're saying. And all of the other retailers just can't seem to find the justification to have staff there. But if you speak to the ones who are open, they're the ones that are saying, that's their busiest time, and that's when they make most of their money. But that message doesn't seem to translate from business to business. So I don't know if you've got some barrier or tips to overcoming some of those communication barriers to the businesses who just can't seem to see the benefit.
Can I Tom, just quickly comment? I think that's great, and I'd love to talk to you some more about this. But, one of the things that I think we don't always do as effectively is we don't document and share data. And so when we're talking with retailers who are reluctant to open after 6, do we have data that can demonstrate what you just said, that business has improved? Or to say, why don't you try it for a while and we'll work with you and we'll highlight your business when you've chosen to stay after 6 and see and determine whether they are actually benefiting from this. But I think it's the communication of the success, I think, becomes a factor. But one simple thing to do on the main street is that quite often after 6, and and people might close the lights off in their store, or they don't highlight the front of their store. Even having all the lights on, towards the end of the evening, says that at least, we're open for business. We're not necessarily open the fact, but we want you to look into our stores and encourage you to come back the next day. I think that's one thing that we found to be effective, is that there's nothing worse than going in later in the day into a place where all the lights in the stores are off. And it really feels like the community isn't alive. One thing also to think about is that while we've been talking about retail and all along, one of the things is there any reason why, if you have a library or you have a small museum, does that museum not stay open till 9? Now that, is starting to talk about children and the fact that children make a lot of our decisions when we're traveling, is that maybe you're running special programs in the library or in the museum that may cater to a market segment that you think is important, that's families with children, and that they would then come down and spend some time. Now, it's good for the library because it gets more people coming in and builds their position within the community. And that can be done through volunteers. It doesn't have to cost any money except for extra lights. And so I think that's one thing to think about. It's not just the retail, but I think it's anything else that might provide an attraction, whether it's right in your main street or adjacent to it. But being able to demonstrate the positive impact and share that becomes, I think, an important ingredient in helping to convince people to do it, even if only for a couple of times, to test out how it works and did it work with staffing and what kind of problems did they have with the kitchen. And they may find it just doesn't work, or they may find the opposite, that, as you said, depending on the nature of the retail activity, it may be something that people are really looking for.
Thanks, Walter. I wanted to pick up on a comment that Kay made in the chat. And Kay, if you're willing to come off mute and talk about this, I'd be curious to learn more. But you talked about using the nighttime economy as part of a way for business retention and finding new businesses. Is that something you've seen in the community, Kay? Is that some of being a bit directed in trying to find new businesses to open up?
Well, certainly I know, many BIAs across the province have been actively involved in business retention and expansion. And, to me, I certainly saw that in Barrie BIA a few years ago, where they actually looked at their BIA on a 24-hour clock because they had so many issues with an unsavory night economy. So they felt that if they started to attract businesses that brought positivity into the main streets during those times, it would help turn the tide. So, part one of their strategy was patios. Making, as long as we've got people on the street, it certainly helps to make the economy a little bit less unsavory in the evening. So that was step one of their goal. But step two certainly was looking to attract businesses that had some longevity and were out on the street at 6 o'clock. The children's party where you could paint in the evenings and, when they're outside of school and that sort of thing. So I've seen it specifically happen in Barrie, but I suspect it will be a strategy going forward as well. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sign off now, but I'm just going to post one other answer here. But thanks guys for doing this again. Take care.
Thanks, Kay. That's great. Does anyone else have any questions or comments they'd like to bring up? While
can I just quickly, building on what Kay just said, I think one of the things that we could look at is that depending on the size of the retail activity, is it possible that it has a second life, which is what Kay was saying and I was mentioning? Does the hairdresser that closes at 6, can that space become something else? Now that has a lot of advantages. It might produce extra rent to the landlord or the owner. It's also a low or no cost investment. So maybe if I'm making pottery and I live in the region, that I can come in and display my pottery, even have some hands-on activities, and that understood that when I leave, that I take everything with me and it's easy to move the chairs back. Are there opportunities with some spaces where they have a double life? And so that is back to the infrastructure. We already have stores and we already have them, and yet after 6 o'clock, many of them are closed. Can we look creatively at certain opportunities? And so what Kay was talking about is key in many cases. It's the vibrancy that comes with that. That not only is it good for retail, it's a safer environment. It feels better as a resident of the surrounding community that you want to go and walk around there and have a coffee at night, go with your dog and have a patio which is pet friendly and offers you that opportunity. So I think that having traveled this summer, so often after 6 o'clock, you don't go to the main street because it's closed. And that to me is troublesome from the point of view of the visitor experience, that they're not really understanding the true value of where they are.
That's great. Thanks, Walter. So I think in the sake of time and keeping to the 1 o'clock, I think we'll start to wrap that up there. But thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Walter, for preparing those presentations.